The morning mist clung to the grounds of Windsor Castle like a delicate veil, promising another day filled with ceremony and tradition. Guard Thomas Whitfield adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time, ensuring every brass button gleamed in the early sunlight. At 28 years old, he had served in the Queen's Guard for 6 years, but the weight of responsibility never lessened. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't place why. Thomas had grown up in a modest home in Yorkshire, where his father worked in the coal mines and his mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. Military service had been his escape from poverty, and the Queen's Guard represented the pinnacle of his career. Every morning, he reminded himself how fortunate he was to protect the royal family, even if it meant standing motionless for hours while tourists took photographs. As he took his position outside the castle's main entrance, Thomas noticed unusual activity in the courtyard. Palace staff hurried back and forth, preparing for what appeared to be an informal family gathering. Through the ornate windows, he caught glimpses of movement inside the grand halls. The Wales family was in residence, and word had spread among the guards that the children would be spending the day exploring the castle grounds. Princess Charlotte, now 10 years old, had become something of a favorite among the palace staff. Unlike her older brother George, who maintained the serious demeanor expected of a future king, Charlotte possessed an infectious curiosity about everything around her. The guards often exchanged stories about her polite questions and genuine interest in their duties. She seemed to understand that behind every uniform stood a real person with hopes, dreams, and families of their own. Thomas remembered the first time he had encountered the young princess 2 years ago. She had been walking with her nanny when she stopped directly in front of his post. While most people either ignored the guards completely or treated them as tourist attractions, Charlotte had studied his face with genuine interest. She hadn't spoken that day, but something in her eyes suggested she saw him as more than just a fixture in a red coat. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the stone courtyard, growing louder as the royal siblings approached. Prince George walked with the measured steps their etiquette lessons had ingrained, while Princess Charlotte practically bounced beside him, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. Prince Louis, still very much a child at 5, ran in circles around his siblings, chasing invisible butterflies. Their protection officers maintained a respectful distance, close enough to respond to any threat but far enough away to allow the children some semblance of normal childhood play. Thomas admired how the family tried to give their children ordinary experiences despite their extraordinary circumstances. These moments of simple joy seemed precious in a life that would be increasingly defined by duty and protocol. As the children's games brought them closer to Thomas's position, he could hear fragments of their conversation. Charlotte was explaining something about the castle's history to her younger brother, her voice animated with excitement. She had clearly been paying attention during their recent tours and lessons, absorbing details that most adults would forget within minutes. "The guards stand here every day," Charlotte was telling Louis, pointing toward Thomas. "They protect everyone inside the castle, even when it's raining or snowing. Mama says they're very brave and dedicated." Thomas felt a surge of pride at her words. It meant something to know that the royal family appreciated their service, that they saw the guards as real people making real sacrifices. Many nights, he had wondered if anyone truly understood what it meant to stand motionless for hours, maintaining perfect posture while his feet ached and his shoulders cramped. The morning progressed with typical ceremony. Tourists gathered at the gates, cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the perfect photograph of the guards. Thomas had learned to tune out most of the noise, but he remained alert to any potential threats or disturbances. His eyes swept the crowd regularly, noting faces and behaviors that seemed out of place. Around midday, as the summer sun climbed higher and the temperature rose, Thomas began to feel the familiar strain of extended guard duty. Sweat trickled down his back beneath the heavy wool uniform, but he couldn't show any sign of discomfort. The stoic image of the Queen's Guard required absolute discipline, no matter how challenging the conditions. It was then that he noticed Charlotte approaching again, this time without her brothers. She walked slowly, seemingly deep in thought, her small hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that reminded Thomas of her grandfather, the king. Her protection officer followed at a distance, alert but allowing her the independence appropriate for a princess her age. Charlotte stopped a few feet away from Thomas's position and simply stood there for several minutes, not speaking or moving. He could sense her presence without looking directly at her, wondering what had captured her attention. Was she studying the architecture of the castle entrance? Watching the way shadows fell across the ancient stones? Or was she thinking about something entirely different? After what felt like an eternity, Charlotte stepped closer. Thomas could see her clearly in his peripheral vision now, noting the serious expression on her young face. She seemed to be wrestling with some internal decision, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You must be very tired," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The comment caught Thomas completely off guard. In 6 years of guard duty, no one had ever acknowledged the physical toll of his position. Tourists often commented on the guards' discipline or asked questions about their training, but Charlotte was the first person to recognize the simple human reality of standing motionless for hours in heavy clothing under the summer sun. Thomas couldn't respond, of course. Protocol demanded absolute silence and stillness during guard duty. But something in Charlotte's observation suggested she understood this limitation and wasn't expecting an answer. She seemed content to simply acknowledge what she had noticed, offering recognition for his endurance even if he couldn't accept it openly. The princess remained nearby for several more minutes, and Thomas found himself acutely aware of her presence. There was something remarkably mature about her stillness, as if she understood the solemnity of his duty and wanted to share in it somehow. Most children her age would have grown bored within seconds, but Charlotte seemed genuinely interested in understanding what his role required. When she finally moved away, Thomas felt an unexpected sense of loss. For those brief minutes, he had felt truly seen and appreciated by someone who mattered. It wasn't just that she was royalty, though her status certainly added weight to her words. It was the genuine concern in her voice, the recognition of his humanity beneath the ceremonial uniform. The afternoon brought its usual parade of tour groups and official visitors. Thomas maintained his position with renewed energy, Charlotte's words echoing in his mind. Somehow, her brief acknowledgement had transformed his understanding of his service. He wasn't just standing guard, he was protecting people who appreciated his sacrifice, who saw him as more than just a traditional decoration. As evening approached and his shift neared its end, Thomas reflected on the day's unexpected encounter. He thought about Charlotte's words, the way she had spoken to him not as a princess addressing a subject, but as one human being recognizing another's efforts. In that moment, the rigid hierarchy that usually defined their respective positions had dissolved into something more fundamental and meaningful. The setting sun painted the castle walls in warm golden hues as the changing of the guard ceremony approached. Thomas knew that tomorrow would bring another day of standing motionless, another test of his physical and mental discipline. But Charlotte's gentle observation had reminded him why his service mattered, why the tradition of the Queen's Guard remained relevant in an ever-changing world. As he prepared to hand over his post to the evening guard, Thomas carried with him a new appreciation for the impact of simple kindness. A 10-year-old princess had seen past his uniform to the person beneath, offering recognition that no amount of official commendation could match. Her words would stay with him long after this particular duty shift ended, a reminder that even the most formal roles were ultimately about serving real people with real appreciation for sacrifice and dedication. The day had started like any other, but Charlotte's gentle observation had transformed it into something memorable and meaningful. Thomas realized that sometimes the most powerful gestures come not from grand ceremonies or official recognition, but from quiet moments of human connection that transcend traditional boundaries and speak directly to the heart. 3 days had passed since Charlotte's unexpected words, but Thomas found himself thinking about the encounter more frequently than he cared to admit. Each morning as he took his position at the castle entrance, he wondered if she would appear again. The memory of her gentle observation had shifted something fundamental in how he approached his duties, infusing each hour of guard duty with renewed purpose. Thomas had written a letter to his parents in Yorkshire, though he couldn't mention the specific details of his encounter with Princess Charlotte. Palace protocol strictly forbade guards from discussing their interactions with the royal family, but he had managed to convey his renewed enthusiasm for his service. His mother had responded with characteristic warmth, expressing her pride in his dedication and reminding him that meaningful work often revealed its importance in unexpected moments. On this particular morning, the castle buzzed with preparation for a small charity event. The Princess of Wales would be hosting a gathering for a children's literacy foundation, and the ground staff had spent hours arranging flowers and ensuring every detail met royal standards. Thomas had been briefed on the additional security measures, though his own post remained unchanged. He would continue his regular duties while other guards managed the specific event logistics. As the morning progressed, Thomas noticed Charlotte walking through the courtyard with what appeared to be a small notebook and pencil. She moved slowly, stopping occasionally to write something down or sketch. Her governess followed at a respectful distance, occasionally pointing out architectural details or historical features of the castle grounds. The sight of Charlotte with her notebook triggered a memory from Thomas's own childhood. His younger sister Emma had carried a similar notebook everywhere, filling it with observations about birds, flowers, and people she encountered. Emma had always been the thoughtful one in their family, the child who noticed details others missed and asked questions that revealed surprising depth of understanding. Emma had been killed in a car accident when she was 12, just 2 years older than Charlotte was now. The loss had devastated their family, particularly Thomas, who had always felt protective of his curious, gentle sister. In many ways, his decision to join the military and eventually seek a position in the Queen's Guard had been motivated by a desire to protect others the way he had been unable to protect Emma. Watching Charlotte move through the courtyard with such focused attention brought back memories of Emma's intense curiosity about the world around her. Both girls shared that rare quality of seeing beyond surface appearances to find deeper meaning in ordinary moments. The parallel was both comforting and painful, reminding Thomas of what he had lost while also highlighting what Charlotte represented for her own family. As Charlotte's educational walk brought her closer to his position, Thomas found himself paying closer attention to her notebook. She seemed to be documenting something specific about the guards, perhaps for a school project or personal interest. When she paused near his post, he could see her writing carefully, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration just as Emma used to do when focused on a challenging task. "The guards must have families too," Charlotte said quietly, apparently speaking to her governess but clearly intending for Thomas to hear. "I wonder if they miss them when they're working such long hours." The observation hit Thomas with unexpected force. Charlotte had somehow intuited one of the most challenging aspects of his service. The long shifts, the requirement to remain at attention for hours, and the demanding schedule did indeed make it difficult to maintain close family relationships. Many guards struggled with the isolation that came with their prestigious position. Thomas thought about his girlfriend Sarah, who worked as a nurse in London. She understood the demands of service professions, but even she sometimes felt frustrated by his unpredictable schedule and the emotional walls he had built around his grief for Emma. Sarah had been patient with his struggles to open up about his feelings, but Thomas knew their relationship required more emotional availability than he had been able to provide. Charlotte's continued presence near his post felt different this time. Where her previous encounter had been spontaneous and brief, this felt more deliberate, as if she had been thinking about their previous interaction and wanted to explore her understanding further. Her notebook suggested she was conducting some kind of study about the guards, perhaps trying to understand their lives beyond the ceremonial roles they played. "Governess Margaret," Charlotte said to the woman accompanying her, "do the guards ever get to talk to their families during the day?" "I believe they have scheduled breaks," the governess replied, "though their duties require significant dedication and focus." "But standing still for so long must be lonely," Charlotte observed, her voice thoughtful. "Even if people are watching, it's not the same as having a conversation or sharing a moment with someone you care about." Thomas was struck by the sophistication of Charlotte's emotional reasoning. At 10 years old, she had grasped something about his experience that many adults never considered. The public nature of guard duty created a particular kind of isolation, surrounded by people but unable to engage with them in any meaningful way. The charity event began in earnest around midday, with elegantly dressed guests arriving for the Princess of Wales's Literacy Foundation gathering. Thomas maintained his focus on security protocols while observing the easy grace with which the royal family interacted with their guests. He noticed how Charlotte, when she briefly appeared with her mother, demonstrated the same genuine interest in others that she had shown toward him. During the event, Thomas overheard fragments of conversation about the Foundation's work promoting reading programs in underserved communities. The cause clearly held deep meaning for the family, and Charlotte seemed particularly engaged when discussing books with some of the young visitors. Her enthusiasm for reading reminded Thomas once again of Emma, who had devoured books with the same passionate intensity that Charlotte brought to her notebook observations. As the afternoon wore on and the event concluded, Thomas noticed Charlotte approaching his post once more. This time, she carried something small in her hand, concealed but clearly purposeful. Her protection officer remained nearby but seemed relaxed, suggesting this was not an unplanned or concerning action. Charlotte stopped at the same distance as before, respecting the invisible boundary that surrounded his position while still making her presence felt. She stood quietly for several minutes, and Thomas could sense her internal debate about whether to proceed with whatever she had planned. Finally, she stepped forward and placed something small on the ground near his feet, close enough for him to see but not so close as to interfere with his duties. It was a small folded piece of paper, clearly torn from her notebook. Without speaking, she stepped back to her previous position and waited. Thomas couldn't look down directly, but his peripheral vision allowed him to see the paper clearly. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "Thank you for protecting us. I hope you get to see your family soon." The simple message contained more genuine appreciation than any official commendation Thomas had ever received. Charlotte had somehow understood that his service involved personal sacrifice, that behind his stoic exterior was a person who missed his loved ones and longed for connection. Her recognition of his humanity felt like the greatest honor of his military career. But the gesture also triggered a complex mix of emotions related to Emma's memory. Charlotte's thoughtfulness highlighted the loss Thomas carried every day, the sister who would never grow up to show such mature compassion. The parallel between the two girls was both beautiful and heartbreaking, reminding him of what Emma might have become while also making him feel protective of Charlotte in a deeply personal way. Charlotte remained near his post for several more minutes, as if waiting to see if her message had been noticed and appreciated. Thomas wished he could acknowledge her kindness directly, could tell her how much her words meant to him and how they connected to his own family story. But protocol required silence, leaving him to communicate his gratitude through the only means available, perfect execution of his duties. When Charlotte finally moved away, she walked with a lighter step, seemingly satisfied that her message had been received. Thomas felt the paper's presence like a physical weight, a tangible reminder of human kindness in the midst of formal ceremony. He knew he would treasure her words long after his shift ended, keeping them as a reminder of why his service mattered. The rest of his afternoon passed in a haze of reflection. Thomas found himself thinking about Emma, about Sarah, and about the way Charlotte's gesture had somehow connected his past grief with his present purpose. The 10-year-old princess had offered him something he hadn't realized he needed, recognition not just of his professional dedication but of his personal sacrifice. As evening approached and the changing of the guard ceremony drew near, Thomas knew this day would join the previous encounter in his memory as a defining moment of his service. Charlotte's gentle thoughtfulness had transformed his understanding of his role from a job into a calling, from mere duty into genuine service to people who appreciated his sacrifice. The folded paper remained at his feet as his replacement took position, a small but powerful symbol of the human connection that made all the ceremony and protocol worthwhile. Tomorrow would bring another day of standing guard, but Thomas now carried with him the knowledge that his service was seen, appreciated, and valued by those he protected. A week had elapsed since Charlotte's thoughtful note, and Thomas found himself approaching his duties with a transformed perspective. The small piece of paper now rested safely in his wallet, read and reread during quiet moments in his quarters. Her words had become a source of strength during the long hours of standing guard, a reminder that his service touched real lives in meaningful ways. The weather had turned unexpectedly cold for late summer, with gray clouds gathering over Windsor Castle and a sharp wind cutting across the courtyard. Thomas's heavy red tunic, usually uncomfortably warm, now provided welcome protection against the chill. He noticed other guards shifting slightly to combat the cold, though they maintained their disciplined postures despite the challenging conditions. Palace life continued its predictable rhythm, but Thomas had begun noticing details that previously escaped his attention. The way morning light struck the ancient stones differently each day. The subtle changes in how visitors approached the guards, some with curiosity, others with indifference. The varying rhythms of castle staff as they went about their duties, each person playing a vital role in maintaining the complex machinery of royal life. These observations reminded him of Charlotte's notebook and her methodical study of castle life. Her curiosity had awakened his own dormant sense of wonder about his surroundings. After 6 years of guard duty, he had thought he knew everything about his post, but Charlotte's fresh perspective had revealed layers of meaning he had missed. Around mid-morning, Thomas noticed unusual activity near the castle's family quarters. Several cars had arrived, and he recognized the distinctive movements of family protection officers preparing for an unscheduled departure. Through his training, he had learned to read these subtle signs that indicated changes in the royal family's plans, though guards at his level rarely received advance notice of such adjustments. The cold wind intensified, and Thomas felt its bite even through his thick uniform. He thought about the note in his wallet and Charlotte's concern for the guards' well-being. Her young mind had grasped something that most adults overlooked, that behind the ceremony and tradition stood real people facing real physical challenges. Today, that understanding felt particularly relevant as he fought to maintain his composure against the increasingly harsh weather. As if summoned by his thoughts, Charlotte appeared in the courtyard, bundled in a warm coat and accompanied by her governess. She moved quickly, clearly affected by the cold, but her path seemed deliberately directed toward his position. Thomas wondered if she had noticed the weather change and felt concern for the guards who had no choice but to endure it. Charlotte approached closer than usual, stopping just at the edge of what might be considered appropriate distance. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. She studied Thomas's face with obvious concern, and he could see her mind working through some internal calculation. "This cold must be terrible for standing still," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "At least when we're cold, we can move around or go inside." Her observation struck Thomas with its simple accuracy. The basic human response to cold was movement, the ability to generate warmth through activity. Guards were denied this most fundamental survival mechanism, forced to endure whatever weather conditions arose during their shifts. Charlotte's recognition of this constraint demonstrated remarkable empathy for someone her age. The governess gently suggested they should move inside, but Charlotte seemed reluctant to leave. She appeared to be wrestling with some decision, her expression serious beyond her years. Thomas wished he could assure her that he was trained for these conditions, that cold weather was simply part of his job, but protocol maintained its absolute silence. Instead of leaving, Charlotte did something completely unexpected. She removed her own warm scarf, a beautiful piece clearly chosen to complement her outfit, and approached Thomas's position. Her protection officer tensed slightly but didn't intervene, recognizing that the princess posed no security threat. "I know you can't move or speak," Charlotte said softly, stepping very close to his position, "but I can't bear to watch you suffer in this cold when I have something that might help." Before Thomas could process what was happening, Charlotte had gently draped her scarf around his shoulders. The gesture was swift and graceful, accomplished with remarkable care to avoid disrupting his formal posture. The scarf's warmth was immediate and welcome, but the emotional impact was overwhelming. Thomas felt tears threatening to form, something that hadn't happened during guard duty in his entire career. Charlotte's gesture transcended every boundary of protocol and hierarchy, reaching across the divide between princess and guard to offer simple human kindness. In that moment, she had treated him not as a ceremonial fixture but as a person deserving care and comfort. The governess looked surprised but didn't protest, perhaps recognizing that Charlotte's action, while unconventional, came from a place of genuine compassion. Other staff members who witnessed the exchange seemed equally moved by the princess's spontaneous kindness, though they maintained professional discretion about what they had observed. "I hope that helps a little," Charlotte said, stepping back to her appropriate distance. "My grandmother always said that when someone is cold and can't help themselves, it's our duty to help them if we can." The reference to the late Queen struck Thomas deeply. Charlotte was following an example of service that had been passed down through generations, interpreting royal duty not as receiving deference but as offering care to others. Her gesture embodied the finest traditions of royal service, demonstrating that true nobility lay in recognizing and addressing others' needs. As Charlotte finally moved away with her governess, Thomas found himself overwhelmed by the weight of her kindness. The scarf around his shoulders was more than protection against the cold, it was a symbol of human connection that transcended all the formal barriers that usually defined his interactions with the royal family. Word of Charlotte's gesture spread quietly among the castle staff throughout the day. Guards changing shifts passed the story in hushed tones, each retelling emphasizing the princess's natural compassion and her intuitive understanding of their challenges. Thomas became something of a legend among his colleagues, the guard who had received such extraordinary kindness from the young princess. The afternoon brought a brief respite from the wind, but temperatures continued to drop. Thomas wore Charlotte's scarf throughout his entire shift, drawing both physical warmth and emotional strength from her gesture. Several tourists commented on the unusual addition to his uniform, but he couldn't explain the story behind it even if protocol had allowed such conversation. During his lunch break, Thomas finally had the opportunity to examine the scarf more closely. It was beautifully made, clearly expensive, with delicate embroidery that suggested it held personal significance for Charlotte. The fact that she had given up something precious to comfort a guard she barely knew made her gesture even more meaningful. Thomas thought about calling Sarah to share the story, though he knew he couldn't reveal many details due to confidentiality requirements. Still, he wanted to tell someone about the profound kindness he had experienced, the way a child's simple gesture had restored his faith in the fundamental goodness of human nature. Sarah would understand the emotional impact even without knowing all the specifics. He also thought about Emma and how she would have reacted to Charlotte's story. Emma had always been drawn to tales of unexpected kindness, stories where people reached across social or cultural divides to help one another. She would have loved knowing that a princess had shown such natural compassion, that royal privilege had been used to comfort someone in need rather than to maintain distance. The parallel between Charlotte and Emma deepened Thomas's emotional response to the princess's gesture. In caring for him, Charlotte had somehow honored Emma's memory, demonstrating the kind of instinctive kindness that Emma had possessed. The connection felt spiritual, as if Emma's compassionate spirit lived on in unexpected places and people. As evening approached and his shift neared its end, Thomas realized that Charlotte's scarf had become more than a practical gift. It represented a bridge between his past grief and present purpose, a tangible reminder that service could create meaningful human connections even within the most formal circumstances. The changing of the guard ceremony proceeded normally, though Thomas's replacement noticed the scarf immediately. Thomas briefly explained its origin, watching his colleague's expression shift from curiosity to amazement to deep respect. The story would become part of guard folklore, a reminder that their service was appreciated in ways they might never fully know. As Thomas prepared to leave his post, he carefully removed Charlotte's scarf, folding it with reverent care. He would return it to palace staff with a message of gratitude, though he knew words could never adequately express what her gesture had meant to him. Charlotte had given him more than warmth, she had given him a renewed understanding of why his service mattered and a profound appreciation for the power of simple human kindness. Walking back to his quarters, Thomas carried with him not just a beautiful scarf but a transformed understanding of his role as a guardian. Charlotte's gentle touch had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Emma's death, a capacity for hope and connection that would influence every day of his remaining service. The princess had given him a gift far beyond material comfort. She had restored his faith in the possibility of meaningful human connection even within the most unlikely circumstances. 2 months had passed since the scarf incident, and autumn had settled over Windsor Castle with its characteristic display of golden leaves and crisp morning air. Thomas had returned Charlotte's scarf through proper channels, along with a carefully worded note of gratitude that followed all protocol requirements. He never learned if she had received his message, but the memory of her gesture continued to influence his daily service in profound ways. The transformation in Thomas's approach to his duties hadn't gone unnoticed by his superiors. His renewed enthusiasm and deepened sense of purpose had earned recognition from the guard commander, who noted improved performance in Thomas's quarterly review. While Thomas couldn't explain the specific catalyst for his renewed dedication, he understood that Charlotte's kindness had fundamentally changed his relationship with his service. More importantly, the princess's gesture had helped Thomas begin to process his grief over Emma's death in ways he had been unable to manage for years. Her spontaneous compassion had reminded him that Emma's spirit of kindness lived on in others, that the love and protection he couldn't provide for his sister could find expression through his service to people like Charlotte. On this particular autumn morning, Thomas noticed increased activity around the castle that suggested a special event was planned. Palace staff moved with the focused efficiency that accompanied important occasions, and additional security personnel had been deployed throughout the grounds. Thomas's briefing had mentioned a small private ceremony but provided few details about its nature or significance. As he took his position at the main entrance, Thomas observed the arrival of several official vehicles and what appeared to be a small group of guests. The gathering seemed more intimate than typical state functions, with an atmosphere that felt celebratory rather than formal. Through the castle windows, he could glimpse preparations that included flowers and what looked like presentation materials. Around mid-morning, Thomas was surprised to see his guard commander approaching with an unusual expression of barely contained excitement. Commander Harrison was known for his strict adherence to protocol and rarely displayed emotion during official duties, so his apparent enthusiasm suggested something extraordinary was happening. "Whitfield," the commander said quietly, "you've been specifically requested to attend a brief ceremony in the blue drawing room. Your replacement is already en route." Thomas felt a surge of confusion mixed with anticipation. Individual guards were rarely singled out for special ceremonies unless they had committed some significant error or achieved unusual distinction. He couldn't think of anything he had done recently that would warrant either type of attention. "Sir, may I ask the nature of the ceremony?" Thomas inquired, following proper channels for requesting clarification. "You'll understand everything shortly," Commander Harrison replied with what might have been the hint of a smile. "I think you'll find it quite meaningful." Thomas was escorted through corridors he had rarely entered during his service, past portraits of previous monarchs and through rooms that spoke of centuries of royal history. The blue drawing room was one of the castle's most elegant spaces, typically reserved for important state functions and private family occasions. As they approached the room, Thomas could hear conversation and gentle laughter from inside. The sound seemed warm and familial rather than formal, adding to his confusion about why his presence had been requested. Commander Harrison paused at the door, giving Thomas a moment to straighten his uniform before they entered. The scene that greeted Thomas took his breath away. The room contained the Prince and Princess of Wales, their 3 children, and several other family members he recognized from official photographs. But what commanded his attention immediately was a large display board covered with photographs, drawings, and written observations about the castle guards. Princess Charlotte stood near the display, wearing a dress that complemented the room's elegant blue decor, her notebook from previous encounters now transformed into what appeared to be a comprehensive study. Her parents flanked her with obvious pride, and her brothers stood nearby with expressions of curiosity and support. "Guardsman Whitfield," the Princess of Wales said warmly, "please come in. Charlotte has something very special to share with you." Thomas entered the room with careful steps, overwhelmed by the unprecedented nature of the situation. Never in his 6 years of service had he been invited into the family's private spaces for any purpose, let alone something involving Princess Charlotte's personal project. Charlotte stepped forward with remarkable poise for a 10-year-old, though Thomas could see traces of nervousness in her expression. She gestured toward her display with obvious pride and excitement. "I've been studying the guards for my school project about service and dedication," Charlotte explained, her voice clear and confident. "I wanted to understand what it really means to protect people, especially when it requires such personal sacrifice." The display was extraordinary in its depth and thoughtfulness. Charlotte had documented different aspects of guard duty, from the physical demands of standing motionless for hours to the emotional challenges of maintaining perfect discipline regardless of weather or circumstances. Her observations demonstrated a level of empathy and understanding that many adults never achieved. "But this project became about more than just studying," Charlotte continued, looking directly at Thomas with the same genuine interest she had shown during their previous encounters. "It became about recognizing that behind every uniform is a real person with real feelings, real families, and real reasons for choosing such difficult service." Thomas felt his composure beginning to waver as he realized the magnitude of what Charlotte had created. She had transformed their brief interactions into a comprehensive study of human dignity and service, using her observations of him as a foundation for understanding the broader meaning of dedication and sacrifice. "Charlotte specifically requested that you be here today," the Prince of Wales added, his voice warm with paternal pride, "because you were the inspiration for this project. Your example helped her understand what true service means." The princess moved to another section of her display, where Thomas was startled to see his own photograph among several other guards. But, rather than a simple identification photo, Charlotte had somehow captured him during one of their encounters, showing him in his full uniform but with an expression of quiet dignity that he had never seen in himself. "This is Guardsman Thomas Whitfield," Charlotte said, as if presenting to a larger audience. "He has served in the Queen's Guard for 6 years, protecting my family and our home. He stands in all weather, stays perfectly still for hours, and never complains or asks for anything in return." Thomas felt tears forming as Charlotte continued her presentation. She had seen him, truly seen him, in ways that went far beyond their brief interactions. Her study had captured not just his professional duties but his personal dedication, his quiet strength, and his fundamental humanity. "But what I learned most," Charlotte said, her voice growing more passionate, "is that true service isn't just about following rules or standing in the right place. It's about caring for others even when they can't care for you back. It's about protecting people not because you have to, but because you believe they deserve protection." The room fell into respectful silence as Charlotte concluded her presentation. Thomas realized that she had articulated something about service that he had felt but never been able to express. Her young mind had grasped the essential truth that meaningful service flowed from love and commitment rather than mere obligation. "Charlotte asked if she could share something with you personally," the Princess of Wales said gently, gesturing for Thomas to approach the princess. Charlotte reached into a small box beside her display and withdrew what Thomas immediately recognized as her notebook, the same one she had carried during their encounters. She had covered it with decorative paper and added a ribbon, transforming it from a simple school supply into something that resembled a precious gift. "I wrote down everything I observed and everything I learned," Charlotte said, offering the notebook to Thomas with ceremony that seemed far beyond her years. "I wanted you to know that your service matters, that someone sees what you do and appreciates the sacrifice it requires." As Thomas accepted the notebook, he felt the weight of Charlotte's recognition settling over him like a mantle of honor. Inside, he found pages of careful observations, thoughtful questions, and insights that revealed a depth of understanding that humbled him completely. She had transformed their brief encounters into a profound study of human dignity and service. "There's one more thing," Charlotte added, stepping closer with the same gentle confidence she had shown when offering her scarf months earlier. "I want to thank you for helping me understand what it means to serve others. Watching you has taught me what I want to be when I grow up, someone who protects and cares for people, even when it's difficult." In that moment, Thomas understood that Charlotte's gesture had come full circle. Her initial recognition of his service had blossomed into a comprehensive understanding of dedication and sacrifice, which had then inspired her own sense of purpose and calling. He had protected her, but she had also protected him, offering recognition and validation that had healed wounds he hadn't even known he carried. The ceremony concluded with warm thanks from the royal family and assurances that Charlotte's project had created a lasting impact on their understanding of the Guard's service. As Thomas prepared to leave, he carried with him not just Charlotte's notebook but a transformed understanding of his own worth and purpose. Walking back through the castle corridors, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple observation about his fatigue and culminated in this moment of profound recognition. Charlotte's gentle touch had awakened something in him that would influence every remaining day of his service and every relationship he would build in the future. That evening, Thomas called Sarah and found himself able to share emotions he had kept buried since Emma's death. Charlotte's kindness had somehow unlocked his capacity for hope and connection, allowing him to envision a future where service and love could coexist in meaningful ways. The princess had given him more than recognition, she had given him the foundation for healing and growth. As he prepared for bed that night, Thomas opened Charlotte's notebook one final time, reading her careful observations about dignity, service, and the fundamental human need for recognition and appreciation. Her gentle touch had sparked more than an unforgettable reaction, it had created a transformation that would ripple through his life for years to come, a reminder that the greatest service often comes from simply seeing and valuing the humanity in others.